again, we have another newsroom. This time I am happy to be joined by Nina Müller, and we'll be looking at, again, what's been happening over the past quarter. Now, we recorded 2 separate sessions because there was a lot, and the second one has really bad sound quality on my end. So I apologize. I hope you can bear it. In any case, there'll be a link in the show notes where you can read everything we're discussing and even more. So thanks for bearing. Nina, thank you for joining me.
Hello, Sergio. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So we have to say that now we're recording together very specific episodes in Through the Looking Glass. And perhaps you should share what that is.
Sure. Thank you, Sergio. Through the Looking Glass is a brand new episode series that we are covering in my podcast, Ethical Allies. And in there, we will take deep dives of one of the news headlines that we're covering in here. And so that we have more time to look into the various different aspects, because running through the headlines is great, but sometimes we just like the time where we think this is a topic where we have a lot more to say. And this is what Through the Looking Glass will be for.
Very good. Well, thank you. Plus, sometimes we want to go beyond the law and into ethics. And I think that's a good opportunity.
Absolutely. And they're always so closely related, ethics and the law. So,
Yes, very good. Okay, so let's kick it off then with the newsroom. And I'll let you start. I'll let you start on the first block, which is e-privacy and regulatory framework. Where do we start?
Well, let's just start with the first headline. In Europe, the most discussed recent case, and probably, as you say, the most complex, is Ireland's 405 million fine, €1 million fine for Instagram, when Instagram had exposed teenagers' private contact details, email addresses, and home addresses, because they were able to set up professional accounts instead of private accounts.
Yeah, and we did touch on this, so I guess at some point there'll be an episode into the Looking Glass. And so, so we leave it at that. There's plenty said there. Moving to more of an AdTech piece, but also about Europe and about enforcement, and perhaps more relevant to where we are in terms of this interplay between AdTech, MarTech, privacy, is Criteo's fine. It's not firm yet, so there was an announcement that the CNIL, the French Data Protection Agency, is looking at that potential fine. The amount of the fine is 60 million euros. And so it seems like it's related to a lack of proper oversight in terms of how they got consent through publishers and advertisers, since Criteo was playing as a sort of data broker, or rather it's a remarketing platform, or it used to be called a remarketing platform, that would allow you to build profiles across different sites. So that's how the whole thing started. Of course, now Criteo has sort of changed gear towards being a retail media and first-party data player, but that's not what the case is about. So we'll see where it ends up. And I'll also add that we did cover some of the associated elements in terms of gathering valid consent in a separate interview, but we'll mention that in the show notes.
Maybe you can, if I may ask a very quick another question on the 60 million euro fine. Maybe you can comment on that. France is doing that a lot. Like they have one of the highest fines in Europe. How effective is that? Because Criteo is a huge company and it will do, it's a dent. It's not really huge damage to them. So how effective are those fines, big or small?
There's been some criticism that France was only chasing big American companies. So in a way, this is a change. It's a French company.
It's a French company.
it's big. I guess it could prove a lot of people wrong if a French company, even though it's a giant company, gets fined. How effective is it? Well, there's still a debate out there as to whether the Spanish approach, which is tiny micro fines to tiny little companies, 600 euro, 1,000 euro fines, right?
Yes.
We've discussed this in the past, is more effective than something that is exemplary. The problem in this case is that the fine is part of a wider strategy, and the CNIL did have to act on this, because in the end, what happened is that in this case, it was Privacy International, if I remember well. For once, it wasn't Johnny Ryan. So Privacy International was chasing this, and along with Criteo, they accused other data brokers. So they filed complaints against others, like at the time, Oracle, which also is being chased elsewhere, and Axiom, Experian, Quantcast. So there were others, and they were all part of this, again, data brokerage. So will this have an impact? I guess yes, in the sense that for now, Criteo has moved away from that activity and firmly embraced first-party data as a new strategy, rather than being in the middle and subject to the validity of consent gathered by people on both sides, publisher and the advertiser side. But it remains to be seen.
Yeah, we would see. I would like if the fine might be related to a certain purpose. I would like to see that, so that the company who is fined will, on top of the fine, of the monetary fine, will be forced to work on better, more sustainable solution that then could also be applied to other companies, which gives them the opportunity to become a role model for acting more privacy friendly, which is, in my opinion, dearly needed.
That'd be good.
Yeah. So next, I would like to talk about digital analytics tools, especially Google Analytics, who now have been banned in 4 countries in Europe: Austria, Italy, France, now Denmark, I think. Maybe there also be a 5th with Norway. I think they're also taking some steps. If not in whole, at least the data transfer to the US has been declared unlawful. So what does that mean for companies, especially as more than 90%, if I'm not wrong, are using Google Analytics as a free and very convenient analytics tool?
The thing is, this happened before we had the Biden executive order, which we'll mention later. So this executive order will have a big impact, as we'll say. But in the meantime, the big problem with Google Analytics is that it's sending data over to the US. Yes. And this was also part of another campaign, which is NOYB, right? Max Schrems.
Yes.
So Max Schrems was chasing 101 cases or websites using either Google Analytics or the Facebook pixel, because those pixels were sending data over to the US. And so in the end, they're sort of permeating through the system and seeing, that's why they're coordinating across different data protection agencies. But the bottom line is that they agreed on one thing. The IP address masking features that Google Analytics was offering was not enough. In fact, the new GA Google Analytics version, GA4, every company will have to move to in January 2023, so around the corner, already doesn't store IP addresses. But it wasn't enough. It was about the fact that you could still get back to the users if you have a surveillance operation by looking at other pieces of data. So in the end, CNIL, the French agency, has been the one that went farther into explaining what should be done by companies using Google Analytics if they wanted to do it lawfully, using a reverse proxy, which means a server in the middle that is in the EU, that is managed by the company using the platform, and that masks the data before it's sent over, or encrypts some of these properties. For example, a user agent or reference that's tied to your browser and allows fingerprinting, and it's unrelated to the IP address.
Do you think the Americans will ever consent to that? Will ever agree to that?
You mean Google or the government?
To the proxy server idea? Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I don't think Google can say much about that, because you could always use a bridge to send your data, your requests on your website over to the tool. But still, even if you do it, it's so much work. And we covered that in another interview with Corey Underwood, who's an engineer and going very deep into privacy and analytics. And it's so much of a hassle that smaller companies, there's no way they're going to do it. Plus the sacrifice in terms of the reports that you end up getting is not worth it. So in any case, this is something that will affect people in the period between SREMS 2, so post-privacy shield, and the new framework whenever it arrives. So you can still be fined for using Google Analytics. But now we have an executive order that, in theory, lowers the risk of surveillance and therefore makes it easier to use standard contract clauses, which is the framework used by Google Analytics. So in theory, the whole thing with Google Analytics being illegal in 4 countries could be going away because of the new possibilities of the executive order.
Yeah. But I would guess this increases insecurity of what I can and what I can do as a business. What alternatives as a business do I have? I mean, I could answer this myself and say, like, there are lots of great European privacy first analytics tools around where you don't pay with your customers' data, but you just pay with the money. But my question to you would be, do we need a more centralized law enforcement of GDPR? Will that help to find solutions and clarity for businesses who are operating in more than one country?
In theory, it's built into the system, into GDPR, that we have, of course, the one-stop shop, so that if it's an American company that's based in Ireland, then that is the lead authority. But of course, if it's acting in other countries, the lead authority will consult with the others, as is happening with Facebook, with Instagram, with Meta. Would it be good to have a single sort of DPA? I don't know. I mean, look at Germany, right? It also needs a federal sort of a coordination, because DPAs are even state level. So I guess it'd be complex.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's worth it. Like this would be my question. Like, we have a GDPR, but the way it is enforced, as we've already seen in the Criteo case, or in CNIL versus Spanish law enforcement, who are pursuing all those small cases. If we have a more consistency there, if that would help, or if that would complicate things, because it would take just so many years to find a compromise that fits all, if that's possible in the first place, because every country has to agree to this. So yeah.
So plenty of wishful thinking, Nina.
Yes,
is good. That's why we need an extra podcast. There's plenty of room for that. Look, there's another piece of news, which is TikTok. Of course, it's always in the news when it comes to privacy and digital marketing. And TikTok is basically sort of catching up with Meta and Google. And now the UK, so ICO, the UK's DPA, is proposing a £25 million fine for mishandling children's data. And that is basically, it's a bit different from the Instagram case in Ireland. So here it's under 13-year-olds that were allowed to sign without proper parental consent. And some special categories of data were being processed. So again, it's not just Article 8, also Article 9 GDPR. And finally, the information being provided wasn't enough. So that's there. But also, still TikTok has been subject to a lawsuit, a class action in Illinois, as in that state in the US, there's a biometric data privacy law under which others have already been forced to pay, like Snap and Facebook and, pretty much all the large platforms. And so there's a new settlement, and TikTok has agreed to pay $92 million to the families that, again, sued it. So again, TikTok keeps receiving and showing how you need deep pockets to process data at scale.
I wonder, begin to wonder, being the privacy nightmare that TikTok is, if that is part of the business plan, if all those fines, I mean, they are not idiots. In fact, what they're doing is quite clever. But it makes me wonder if the platform primarily was built to spy on people and to retrieve unconsented information about people, and only secondary as also being a social media.
Perhaps it was part of the plan from day one.
Maybe it was part of the plan, but anyhow, the fact is the fines doesn't do any damage. They will not change their business model, or will not change their behavior, or becoming a more ethical company. So what do we do with those?
Well, there's some calls I've read recently to split social media companies and have apps that serve children and apps that serve adults. Paying fines may still be part of the business plan, but at least you are drawing a line between children who don't really know what they're getting into and adults that perhaps could be forcing, via even market forces, certain changes by simply being aware of the consequences and slowly withdrawing from these platforms because of our own understanding of the side effects, something that children couldn't do. So Nina, we left it. I have to say that we left this thing halfway because it was a lot and we got excited about everything, which is good.
Yes.
And so this is the second part that, of course, we'll join together in the same Newsroom episode. But we left it just as we were about to enter legal updates on e-privacy. And so within legal updates, there was something that happened, which is the Joe Biden's executive order to finally pave the way to what could be a Privacy Shield 2.0, as some people call it. So, letting people or letting companies send data over, transfer personal data over to the US in a way that is not so painful after Schrems 2, after the court case that we've been discussing all over the place, that basically did away with Privacy Shield and made standard contract clauses very hard, and ended up with Google Analytics being pretty much, very hard to use, and with things like Mailchimp being almost impossible to use, HubSpot, all of these tools that were based on US-based clouds and didn't have local storage in the EU. But now we have an executive order. It doesn't mean much from a European perspective yet, but just to summarize it, because in the end we did write a separate piece, so I wouldn't bore people with it. The key thing is that there's hope, because it means that the US government is trying to give assurances that Europeans will have legal redress in the US if they're spied, if spied upon. And then secondly, that there'll be some guarantees that there'll be a reason for surveillance. And if it happens, it'll be more limited to whatever is a very specific purpose. So, of course, everything can be discussed. We've had a couple of interviews already going deep into this. Some people, of course, are highly skeptical of this, starting with Max Schrems himself, which is why, of course, there's talk of Schrems 3. But because we've already covered it in a couple of interviews, I wouldn't want to go too deep into that one, simply to mention it. But perhaps you've heard something else, something new about it, or you have additional ideas.
Yep, I think one of the fundamental problems with the executive order, that one important issue still remains especially for Europeans, that European citizens are, or in fact any other
citizen that is non-US is treated, or their data is treated differently than that of US citizens.
So we did review this in a recent interview, and 2 interviews touching on the differences. But yeah, it goes very deep. I have to tell you something else to move on a little bit. You know, the UK wants to leave the GDPR, of
I was
course.
about to ask that. Like, what does that mean? What are they playing at? I find this very confusing.
Yeah, well, first caveat, we have to say this happened while Liz Truss was the prime minister. So this means it happened within a 45-day window.
Yeah.
And yeah. So it was very short-lived. But it does seem like the ideas are in place, and there was a pretty deep debate about it. And I have to say, I believe they have a point. So something that happened is that during the Tory conference, they were outlining the policies and how they plan to make the UK economy more dynamic. And something they said is, well, the GDPR is proven a burden for small companies, and we have been, experiencing all of these problems derived from having such strict requirements to process personal data. Again, in local communities, small businesses, churches, and this is really not good. Whereas large companies really, have a way to comply because that is regulatory, bodies, and they have this muscle. And these days, funny enough, there was an article in the Spanish press as well on the cover of one of the main newspapers talking about this, about how data protection laws have become a problem for everyday citizens, where they cannot do things they used to be able to do because in the name of privacy, certain bodies will refuse to give them, contact details for a taxi driver, for example, that once you've forgotten your stuff in the taxi, you will never get a number for the cab driver because of GDPR. The cab driver cannot call you as a customer once they found your laptop or phone because of GDPR. You need to fill out a million forms. I know in Spain it is a nightmare already. So they have a point. In the UK, they were talking about an example they gave is that churches are scared. They're worried about sending a newsletter because, of course, they may be using Mailchimp. They didn't say this, but I can see that. It's a very common program, but it's stored in the US. Now you tell the church to go and deal with standard contract clauses and find another provider and read through SCCs. That's something that Shell can deal with, but not a local church community. So they simply stop sending a newsletter. So they have a point. They were talking about plumbers having to fill out a million forms they don't understand. And something else that is very interesting also in this article in Spain the other day is that even though our lives are harder because of the GDPR, because it is true, with small businesses, they struggle a lot, even though we have this thing. At the same time, the worst violations are still happening because everything that is happening online remains the same because it's being performed by very large players, of course, always protected by consent.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, it's so easily and so very often violated with so little enforcement. Well, at the same time, life for the small and medium-sized business, it's harder to send out the newsletter for a local church. So I'm a bit skeptical about like letting it all go, but I think we just need a better and more modern that is adjusted to everyday needs and requirements, and it requires large as well as small players, and protects individuals better. There must be a middle way.
There must be.
It's complex, but I think this is the only way we need to if we want to keep our privacy safe and protected.
Yeah, I mean, there was even a call. I hadn't found this one. I was told I couldn't find it for companies that have less than 500 employees to avoid all sorts of paperwork, even a DPO.
Yeah, and it doesn't always make sense. So I think there should be something like a collective DPO responsible for several or something. I don't know. I haven't thought about this really. But I definitely think there are viable solutions to this. This is not really a huge problem. By letting go of that will just create loopholes and make it harder to track when in case of violations happening. I very much look forward to look out for the developments of in the future.
Okay, so just to wrap it up, what about Twitter? How do you say what's happening?
I find it problematic, and I'm very concerned about this. I liked Twitter as a platform to spread business news, to inform people, because it was so very well connected and was working very well. Now Elon Musk has plans to charge the most loyal and verified customers to use Twitter in the first place. I think this is the wrong move. Definitely they will move away.
Do you think that that'll be the case?
And well, which narrows down the opinions, and this will narrow down the opinion to and move it into one direction.
At this point, verification on Twitter is totally arbitrary. You know, so people that ask for it, of course, you've got certain something is very clear. Journalists, they have made a very strong case for verification. It makes all the sense. If you want to fight misinformation, you make sure that actual journalists are verified. So you know you're reading from a good source, right? And the top journalists from the top publishers, from top media, or media that we know, they are verified. So they were very quick to complain. Look, if you make us pay, it means first, we may not want to pay, therefore we look less real. And second, those that want to spread fake news only have to pay to look like a journalist. So you're not helping. What I think is not necessarily the case. I think that you can do two things here. You can either do a top-down approach, and you aim to verify every single person and see how close to the truth they can be. And I think that's an impossible task. In the World Wide Web, trying to tell someone, oh, what you say is more true than what she says, just because you come from the New York Times, I think that's the wrong approach. And I think that if you build something like Twitter, which is so community-based, there's going to be a way for the community to discriminate in a very democratic way what seems to be not just fake, but harmful. So by letting people pay, or making sure that, or at least take the trouble to show it's themselves to prove their identity, whether it's just paying for the trouble of doing that verification, which is costly, you ensure that those that really want to get the message across and want to prove that it's, they are who they say they are, they will pay to get this done, or an organization will make sure that it happens. And that's one thing. So I really have hope for something that is really more decentralized, but my concern is about the business model. How do you turn this into a business model when, as many people say, Twitter runs counter to things that people like in terms of, mass media? People want videos like TikTok. People want images like Instagram. And Twitter is text. It's about people sharing mostly text and being able to appreciate reading what others say.
It's very complex, and I was just beginning to wonder, what was his main motivation to buy Twitter in the first place? Was it just because he's so keen on being in the media, on making a fuss and making noise, which he clearly is. He likes to stand in
for sure.
But then, what is his main reasoning? Is it to control media better, or is it what he claims is that he wants it to be an open space where everybody can say what they want? If you really think that it's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah.
But he's not a stupid man. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, I think he likes the medium. I think he really likes it. And he just, it's like, he had this, he could do it. So he said, okay, let's do it. I love this medium. Nina, we'll have to say,
we would see about this, but definitely
yes,
at the end of this discussion. Yeah.
yes. Nina, thanks again. Thanks for joining. It was a great debate. We could go on forever. So I look forward to the next episode in Through the Looking Glass and the future newsrooms.
Yes, I'll send you an invite, and I look very much forward to speaking to you again. It was a great pleasure to be here, to be your guest today.
Thank you. Okay, that's all for today, and you will find some episode notes and links to our social channels on mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.